Robert Plant spent his life surrounded by music, fame, and some of the biggest crowds rock history has ever seen. But the most important person in his story was never standing under the spotlight. "I knew what I had lost," Plant admitted years after one of the most painful chapters of his life. The woman he was talking about wasn't a celebrity, wasn't a fellow rock star, and wasn't someone he met after becoming famous. She was the woman who believed in him when he had almost nothing. And more than 50 years later, her shadow still stretches across every chapter of his life. The woman who believed in him before the world did, before the sold-out stadiums, before the platinum records, and before millions of fans began calling him the golden god of rock. Robert Plant was a teenager drifting through England with little certainty about his future. He had grown up in West Bromwich, the son of civil engineer Robert C. Plant and Annie Celia Kane, whose Romany heritage filled his imagination with stories, folklore, and a fascination with people who lived outside society's expectations. His father wanted something more practical. Like many parents in post-war Britain, he hoped his son would pursue a stable profession and avoid the uncertainty of the entertainment business. But Robert had already fallen in love with something that could not be explained away by logic. He spent hours listening to imported blues records by Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and Sonny Boy Williamson. In later interviews, Plant often described those records as life-changing. They gave him a sense of freedom he could not find anywhere else. By 16, the conflict at home had reached a breaking point. Plant left school with few qualifications and walked away from the future his family had imagined for him. According to biographer Mick Wall in When Giants Walk the Earth, the young singer spent years taking physically exhausting jobs while trying to establish himself in local bands around the Midlands. He worked construction, laid asphalt, and accepted almost any labor he could find. The money was barely enough to survive. Some weeks he earned less than £20. Most people around him viewed music as a hobby that would eventually fail. But there was one person who saw something different. Her name was Maureen Wilson. Plant met Maureen during the mid-60s, long before Led Zeppelin existed. Friends who knew the couple during those years often described her as calm, grounded, and remarkably supportive of Robert's ambitions. While he moved between temporary jobs and late-night performances in pubs and clubs, Maureen remained beside him. She was there during the years when record companies showed no interest. She was there when audiences numbered in the dozens rather than the thousands. Most importantly, she was there when success seemed very far away. Plant later admitted that those years were difficult, both emotionally and financially. Unlike many stories that are rewritten after fame arrives, this was not a glamorous struggle. He slept wherever he could, borrowed money when necessary, and chased opportunities that rarely paid anything meaningful. Yet Maureen never demanded that he abandon music and choose a safer path. She believed in him at a time when belief was not easy. That loyalty would soon be tested. In the summer of 1968, a struggling guitarist named Jimmy Page arrived in Birmingham searching for a singer. The meeting lasted only hours. The consequences would last forever. Fame arrived, but so did temptation. When Jimmy Page first saw Robert Plant perform in the summer of 1968, he immediately sensed that he had found something extraordinary. The Yardbirds had collapsed. Page was facing professional uncertainty, and he desperately needed a vocalist capable of fronting a new band. According to Page's own recollections in multiple interviews, Plant's voice stood out from everyone else he had auditioned. Within days, Plant was invited to join the project that would soon become Led Zeppelin. He, in turn, recommended drummer John Bonham. Together with John Paul Jones, the lineup was complete. What followed was one of the fastest rises in music history. Within months, Led Zeppelin transformed from an unknown group into a phenomenon. Their debut album exploded across both Britain and America. Then came another successful album, followed by relentless touring schedules that kept the band on the road for months at a time. By the early 70s, Robert Plant had become one of the most recognizable figures in rock music. His long blonde hair, powerful voice, and commanding stage presence earned him a reputation that few performers could match. Yet while the public was discovering Robert Plant the rock star, another chapter of his life was unfolding quietly away from the spotlight. On November 9, 1968, only weeks after Led Zeppelin officially began its journey, Plant married Maureen Wilson. Unlike many celebrity marriages that began after fame arrived, theirs had started before any fortune existed. She had known him when he was working construction jobs and struggling to pay bills. She had watched him chase impossible dreams when nobody else was paying attention. Plant rarely spoke publicly about his private life, but one of the clearest windows into his feelings came through his music. The song Thank You, featured on Led Zeppelin's second album, was written as a tribute to Maureen. The lyrics were unusually personal for Plant, who often preferred mythology and fantasy themes. Music journalists and biographers have long pointed to the song as one of the most sincere love letters ever recorded by the band. In later interviews, Plant openly acknowledged that the song was dedicated to his wife. But fame has a way of testing even the strongest relationships. As Led Zeppelin conquered America, stories about excess began following the band everywhere. Hotels, parties, groupies, and endless temptation became part of the rock and roll lifestyle. Newspapers eagerly reported every rumor. One of the most infamous stories connected to the band was the so-called Mud Shark incident in Seattle, a story later discussed by musicians including Carmine Appice and referenced in various rock biographies. Whether every detail was true hardly mattered. Led Zeppelin's reputation had become larger than life. Plant eventually grew uncomfortable with many aspects of that world. Years later, he admitted that the groupie culture surrounding major rock bands often disturbed him. According to interviews he gave during the 70s and 80s, he became increasingly disillusioned with what he saw happening around him. Behind the headlines and the wild stories, he was still trying to maintain a family life with Maureen. Unfortunately, another woman was about to enter the story, and decades later, her name would remain one of the most controversial chapters of Robert Plant's personal life. The loss that changed everything. By the middle of the 70s, Robert Plant appeared to have everything a person could want. Led Zeppelin had become one of the most successful bands in the world. Their albums were selling millions of copies. Concerts sold out within hours. Industry insiders estimated that the group was generating enormous revenues from touring, merchandise, and record sales. To fans, Plant seemed untouchable. The reality was very different. In August, while vacationing with his family on the Greek island of Rhodes, Plant was involved in a devastating car accident. According to reports from the time and accounts later detailed in several Led Zeppelin biographies, he suffered serious injuries, including a broken ankle and elbow. Maureen was hurt even more severely, sustaining a fractured skull and multiple injuries. For a period, Plant feared his wife might not survive. The accident forced him into a wheelchair for months. Led Zeppelin was forced to cancel a major North American tour, costing millions of dollars and disappointing thousands of fans. But the financial losses were insignificant compared to what Plant experienced personally. During recovery, he spent long periods at home with Maureen and their children, confronting the possibility that everything he had built could disappear in an instant. If the accident shook him, the tragedy that followed nearly destroyed him. On July 26th, while Led Zeppelin was touring the United States, Plant received news that his 5-year-old son Karak had died suddenly from a severe viral infection. According to numerous accounts from band associates and journalists who covered the tragedy, Plant had been thousands of miles away when his son became ill. He immediately prepared to return home, but the illness progressed with shocking speed. The loss shattered him. Friends later described a man who disappeared from public life almost entirely. The confident frontman who had commanded arenas filled with tens of thousands of people suddenly wanted nothing to do with fame. Plant isolated himself for months at his farm in Worcestershire. He lost weight, avoided public appearances, and seriously considered leaving music forever. One person remained constantly by his side during that period: Maureen. She had lost the same child. She was carrying the same grief. Yet according to people close to the family, she became one of the few sources of stability Plant could still lean on. Together, they faced a pain that neither money nor fame could lessen. Plant later transformed that grief into one of the most emotional songs of his career. All My Love was written as a tribute to Karak. In interviews years later, he acknowledged that the song was his way of honoring his son's memory. Unlike the mystical lyrics that had defined much of Led Zeppelin's music, this song came from a deeply personal place. The tragedy changed Plant permanently. The man who emerged afterward was different from the carefree rock star who had entered the decade. Fame mattered less. Parties mattered less. Even music itself seemed less important than the people he loved. But just when Plant was trying to rebuild his life, another devastating loss was waiting around the corner. The woman he lost. The woman he never replaced. When John Bonham died in September, the loss hit Robert Plant with a force few people could fully understand. Bonham had been more than a drummer. He had been one of Plant's closest friends since their days in the Midlands, long before success arrived. According to Plant's own interviews over the years, Bonham was one of the few people who truly understood what life had been like before Led Zeppelin. They had shared tiny stages, financial struggles, family milestones, and unimaginable grief. The band's decision to disband after Bonham's death was immediate and unanimous. In their official statement, the surviving members explained that they could not continue without him. For Plant, it marked the end of an entire chapter of his life. Within only a few years, he had lost his son and then lost the friend who had helped him survive that tragedy. Yet another relationship was also beginning to fracture. The years following Led Zeppelin's breakup brought new opportunities, but also new pressures. Plant launched a successful solo career, releasing albums that proved he could stand on his own. According to Billboard records, his early solo projects achieved impressive chart success in both the United States and the United Kingdom. He was constantly recording, touring, and rebuilding his identity outside the shadow of Led Zeppelin. But while his professional life was moving forward, his marriage was moving in the opposite direction. In 1983, Robert Plant and Maureen Wilson divorced after nearly 15 years of marriage. The split surprised many fans because Maureen had been present throughout every major chapter of his rise to fame. She had been there before the records, before the fortune, before the private jets and sold-out arenas. She had endured the endless tours, the media attention, the car accident, and the death of their son. The reasons behind the divorce were never discussed in great detail publicly. Both Plant and Maureen largely chose privacy. However, several biographers and music journalists have pointed to the enormous strain created by years of touring and long separations. Fame had demanded a price from their relationship, and eventually, the marriage could no longer survive it. What happened next only added to the controversy. Plant later began a relationship with Shirley Wilson, Maureen's younger sister. In 1991, they welcomed a son, Jesse Lee. The relationship generated considerable attention because of the family connection. Over the years, various rock writers and journalists have linked Shirley to rumors surrounding the emotional inspiration behind some of Plant's most personal material, including speculation connected to "Since I've Been Loving You." Plant himself never publicly confirmed those stories, leaving much of the discussion in the realm of biography and rumor, rather than established fact. Yet, despite new relationships and new chapters, many people who followed Plant's life noticed something unusual. Maureen never completely disappeared from the story. Unlike many celebrity divorces that end in public bitterness, there was no lengthy media war. No books exposing secrets. No endless interviews attacking one another. Instead, there remained a sense that the bond forged before fame had never entirely vanished. The woman who had believed in him when he was a struggling musician was no longer his wife, but she remained one of the most important figures in his life. Who is the woman he never forgot? Today, Robert Plant lives a very different life from the one that made him famous. The chaos that once surrounded Led Zeppelin has largely faded, At 77, he continues to perform with saving grace and focuses on projects he genuinely enjoys rather than chasing commercial success. With an estimated net worth of around $200 million and a legacy few musicians can match, he has little left to prove. In recent years, Plant has shared his life with his longtime partner, Dawn Angeli. Their relationship has remained largely private, something Plant values more than ever. When Dawn became the target of harsh online criticism, he publicly defended her, making it clear that he would not allow strangers to define the people he loves. Yet even as new chapters were written, the older ones never disappeared. One of the most striking things about Robert Plant's life is that nearly every major turning point leads back to Maureen Wilson. She was there before Led Zeppelin existed. She was there when he was struggling to survive, when success finally arrived, and when tragedy struck. She stood beside him through the Rhodes car accident and shared the devastating loss of their son, Carrick. She witnessed every stage of the journey that turned him into a rock legend. Many people entered Plant's life after fame arrived. Very few knew him before it. That distinction matters. According to friends, biographers, and interviews spanning decades, Plant has often reflected on the people who helped him through life's hardest moments. Again and again, the story returns to Maureen. Not because their marriage lasted forever. It didn't. Not because their relationship was perfect. It wasn't. But because some people become part of who you are. There is a reason fans still talk about Maureen more than 40 years after their divorce. She was there before the records sold millions, before Stairway to Heaven became legendary, before the private planes and worldwide fame. She knew the young man sleeping on friends' floors and working construction jobs while chasing an unlikely dream. She believed in him when there was little reason for anyone else to. At 77, Robert Plant has never publicly called Maureen Wilson the one he never forgot. But when you look at the story of his life, the pattern is hard to miss. Long before the fame, the fortune, and the legend, there was a young woman who chose to believe in him. And decades later, her place in his story remains untouched. Do you think first loves and early relationships leave the deepest mark on a person's life, even after decades have passed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more untold celebrity stories.